I'm Valerie Traub, and I'm a professor of English and Women's Studies at the University of Michigan. And I work on 16th and 17th century British literature and culture with an emphasis on gender and sexuality.
Hi, my name is Brandon. I'm a first-year PhD student in personality and social context psychology, and my area of interest is stigmatized sexuality and different types of relationships.
And I'm Allie. I'm a second year in the Joint Women's Studies and Personality and Social Context Psychology program. I study stigmatized sexualities as well, but right now I'm looking at gender differences in sexual behavior. So I was looking a lot at casual sex, and now I'm moving my focus to hypoactive sexual desire disorder.
There were doctors who were aware of an organ that they actually designated the clitoris. But that concept was kind of lost when the medical texts from the ancient world were lost to the West, and when Christianity became the dominant mode of learning and knowledge about the body. And it was only in the 16th century that anatomists who began dissecting bodies during that time, rather than just reading about how bodies were supposed to look, they actually started taking people's, reproductive organs and sexual organs apart, and they rediscovered the clitoris. They had a couple of interesting assumptions about the clitoris. First off, they called it the female yard because yard was slang for penis, and they thought the penis and the clitoris were essentially the same organ. But they also, because of these analogies between male and female, penis and clitoris, they thought that the female clitoris acted a lot like the male penis. I mean, they both get erect, They also obviously are a source of deep pleasure. But what confused them a little bit is that they thought that women and men both produce seed, and in order for conception to occur, the seed had to be mingled within, the uterus, within the womb. But because of these ideas that both men and women had to ejaculate for conception to occur, and because they thought the purpose of sex, as you know, was reproduction, or otherwise it was sinful, they had a pretty high cultural investment in women having orgasms. Then the ovum was discovered. And when the ovum was discovered, and they discovered that women didn't emit seed through orgasm, but rather that the ovum was there being released on a monthly basis, women's orgasmic pleasure got sidelined. It got completely set aside. And that's what eventually led to the idea that chaste or virtuous women don't enjoy sex. And that if you did have an orgasm, it might mean that you were unchaste or even, a kind of a whore. And this is, the stereotype of Victorian sexuality in the West.
I think sex for men has always been defined by having an orgasm, right? So it's not successful sex unless there's an orgasm on the man's part. Whereas I feel it's more typically understood that for women it's just penetration.
That's how sex has always been defined, is just by penetration, very heteronormative.
Yeah. And I think that's based on reproductive understandings, right? So it's understood that men have to ejaculate for pregnancy to occur, but a woman doesn't have to orgasm to get pregnant. So I think that's just kind of constructed what we think about sex and orgasm and stuff like that.
Can't assume that what is natural is normal or is equals good. So even if it is unnatural, why shouldn't a woman orgasm? So I don't know. Or if it's not normal, I don't think that's enough justice to say then women shouldn't want to have sex or this is wrong. Stereotypically, women are known to be more caring about others' needs. That's just in general, not only in reference to sex. And so, going off of that, you would assume that women would be more investing in the male's needs than vice versa. And men are also socialized to be more agentic and assertive, and so they would be, and also more like autonomous, so they might be more interested in their own sexual pleasure. I mean, that's just going off other gender stereotypes, but I would assume that men would be more likely to be concerned with their own sexual needs and a woman to be more concerned about his sexual needs, which is another reason I think there is the orgasm gap and why that might decrease during a relationship.
And confusion about female orgasm isn't only limited to male understandings either, so women are often confused about their own orgasms, and a lot of times women don't achieve orgasm until later in life anyways, whereas men like usually orgasm very early in life, really close to puberty. So in some instances it might be that a woman might not even know how to counsel her partner into like achieving orgasm for herself.
Yeah, women are much less likely to masturbate than men.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of it, is that they aren't, I mean, not to like blame the woman by any means, but they're less familiar with their bodies. And so they're less able to, A, like know what causes orgasm, and B, be able to communicate that to their partner. So, whereas men are much more familiar with their body. Well, so interestingly, the data shows that women and men have equally positive attitudes towards masturbation. So when they're asked like their thoughts about it, they feel like they both report similar attitudes. However, when they're asked about actual behavior, men report much more frequent masturbation than do women, or even like ever having masturbated. I think there's like a large portion of women that like have never masturbated, and I agree that there's a big stigmatization around women who masturbate. I don't think it's, I mean, think about like guys joking around about jacking off. I mean, that is like a common discourse, and women don't have that same, or at least not with the same frequency of conversation about that. So I think there's just a lot of kind of silence around, well, female masturbation, but female body in general.
So it wasn't until the kind of early to mid 20th century when sexologists, who consider themselves to be scientists, actually started investigating orgasm again, that female orgasm got put back on the, agenda. Famously, Freud, in the early part of the 20th century, thought that the proper, mature way for a woman to have an orgasm was to have a vaginal orgasm.
But they were showing all these people that were going in to get these experimental treatments because they thought they had this disorder, either like female orgasmic disorder or HSDD, and they were getting these crazy things. Some lady had like this electrical something inserted in her spine, and then she had a button where she could like manually stimulate an orgasm, only it didn't work, and so when she pressed the button, her left leg would like shake out, and so she got it removed. But she found out that, so her complaint was that she wasn't having vaginal orgasms. She could still achieve orgasm. She could have like clitoral orgasms, but she couldn't orgasm during intercourse. And so she thought something was wrong, and she went to go get this treatment, and she spent all this money and all this time like thinking something was wrong with her. And I think throughout the film she like learns that she's normal, and that this like happens to a lot of women, and like the clitoral orgasms are just fine. And she was literally like dancing around, and she was like, I'm not sick, like I'm normal. And she was like 60 years old. So this woman has like for a long time thought something was wrong with her, and I think that is a huge problem with like trying to normalize, I don't know, I mean, what desired orgasm is, and trying to compare men's and women's as well, because I don't think they're comparable.
Yeah.
I mean, women, I think it's more complex the way that a female orgasm occurs. I mean, it takes longer. I mean, this is like on average. So especially when sex is being defined by penetration, by the male orgasm and ejaculation. I mean, sex is defined by the male having an orgasm, but not the female. So I think that would result in men having more pleasure from sex, although, like we said, in more committed relationships, women are more likely to have an orgasm, and since women can have more orgasms per like sexual act, I would assume that they could have more pleasure given that.
True.
I think that there is a presumption that gay men have the best sex.
Oh yeah, we researched this.
Yeah.
Did you find anything?
So I looked up differences between straight men and gay men. I didn't really find anything.
That's interesting.
Out there. So I'm guessing that there probably isn't that big of a difference in terms of gay men and straight men, but there is a difference between heterosexual women and lesbian couples, where so that lesbian couples often experience more orgasm.
Yeah.
Right?
In public discourse, I'm not sure. I think that one is more taboo than the other. I think that sex remains, if not taboo, something that you have to announce you're crossing a boundary.
I think part of it goes back to the fact that like we have traditionally there's an understanding that sex is for procreation, and a woman doesn't need to orgasm to procreate, but a man does technically. So I mean that's a reason I think like the female pleasure has just been kind of brushed aside.
So I think it has a lot to do with just the topic of sex being taboo.
What's her first name? Her last name is Elders,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not Jacqueline, it's Jocelyn or something like that. And she was Clinton's appointee to be the Surgeon General, and she had to step down because the New Right made such a big deal about her advocating sex education in the schools. And then, we turned to abstinence-only education.
Right.
And except under private school, most public schools that took public money had to go to abstinence-only education.
Mm-hmm.
And under Bush. And then, and she also used the word masturbate, like in a speech, and that totally freaked people out. The history of sexuality isn't a straight line forward of progress.
Mm-hmm.
We take steps forward, we take steps back.
Yeah, and women have been like both hypersexualized and then totally desexualized, like throughout history. I mean, looking at both our culture and other cultures that have performed clitorectomies or female genital mutilation. So they mutilate female genitals, but particularly the clitoris, which is clearly a place of pleasure. So it's like there's just this desire to control female sexuality. So if women aren't orgasming, then they're enjoying sex. But if you don't want women to be enjoying sex, then you're going to want to cut that off. And so I think that there's been like a huge desire by whomever to control female sexuality, which can occur by silencing discussion about orgasming or actually removing their ability to orgasm.
I mean, once you limit the size of families, women's, health, economic status, and well-being increases. If you're talking, in broad social terms. So population control, while there can be nasty ways in which population control has happened in terms of eugenics, for instance, or racism, or, forced sterilization, and all of those horrible things that you're starting to talk about in your class. The idea that women could have some control over, limiting their family size through separating sex from reproduction has been, world-changing. You wouldn't have women in positions of power today if that weren't the case. Pleasure. It's about pleasure. Most people don't know this stuff.
Yeah, no, that was really good.